Okay, so I want you to try and take a step back with me to late 2001.
Right after 9/11.
Exactly. The towers have fallen, the dust, I mean, it hasn't even begun to settle in New York, and the entire country is just holding its breath.
And then this new threat emerges.
Right, but it's not from the sky, it's not a hijacker, it's coming through your mail slot.
The Anthrax attacks.
Exactly. And I think for most of us, when we look back, we remember the visible stuff. The panic.
The hazmat suits on Capitol Hill, the news footage.
For sure. The fear of opening your own mailbox. But today we're doing something a little different. We're digging into a stack of sources that tell a completely different side of that story.
A side that really didn't happen on TV. It happened, in the basement of the J. Edgar Hoover building, in high containment labs, in the quiet, bureaucratic machinery of the government.
That's it exactly. We're looking at source material specifically titled, When the System Moved. And it's fascinating because it argues that the real story, the actual pivotal moment, wasn't the first letter. It was the specific point the FBI investigation transformed from treating these as isolated, tragic incidents into a unified, massive national security pattern.
And that is such a critical distinction to make right up front. It sounds subtle, almost like semantics.
It does.
But it changes the entire mechanics of how a government responds. When you treat something as a crime, you look for a criminal.
Yeah.
You collect evidence, interview witnesses. Simple.
But a national security pattern.
You're not just looking for a criminal anymore, you're looking for a war.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly that. How an investigation operates under that kind of extreme pressure. We're going to look at how these incidents hurtle into patterns.
And that very dangerous moment the sources highlight.
When authorities switch from just reacting to actively pursuing, because it seems once you start pursuing, it is very, very hard to stop.
That's a key takeaway here. Momentum is a powerful force in bureaucracy, just as much as it is in physics. Once a machine that big, and we're talking about the entire U.S. federal law enforcement apparatus, starts moving in one direction, well,
it doesn't turn on a dime.
It takes enormous energy to turn it around.
Okay, let's dive in. The source material starts by describing this shift, but it emphasizes it was silent. It says, and I'm quoting here, something changes, not publicly, not in a press conference, inside the system. What are we actually looking at here?
We're looking at the machinery waking up to a brand new reality. We often look for that big aha moment on the nightly news, but the source makes it clear the real change was happening in memos.
In memos.
Memos, routing slips, in who had to sign off on what piece of paper. It was bureaucratic.
It mentions mailrooms specifically, which feels so mundane, given the stakes.
It does feel mundane until you realize the implication. Think about what a mailroom was before late 2001. It was processing center. Its only job was efficiency, get letter A to person B fast.
Right.
But the source notes that almost overnight, mailrooms stopped being processing centers. They became security checkpoints.
Checkpoints, that's a really heavy word for a mailroom.
It implies a border, doesn't it? It implies that outside is dangerous and inside needs protection. The source says mailrooms don't just handle envelopes anymore. They became the front line of a biodefense strategy.
So what did that look like?
Practically, it meant irradiation equipment, new protocols for gloves and masks, huge delays. But psychologically, it meant every single piece of paper coming into a government building was now treated as a potential weapon.
Wow. It's like how airport security changed, but it was happening in the basements of office buildings.
Exactly, and that leads to the next big point in the material, the realization that these weren't just random acts. The source breaks it down. One newsroom, one office, one death. At first, they just looked like isolated tragedies.
Because early on, nobody knew they were connected. A man in Florida dies, a news anchor gets a weird rash. It seems totally random.
Correct. And you have to understand, systems like the FBI or the CDC, they're plagued by what investigators call linkage blindness.
Linkage blindness? I've never heard that term. What is that?
It's a phenomenon where you have different jurisdictions or different departments all handling these singular events, and nobody zooms out far enough to see they're connected.
So they see the trees, not the forest.
Precisely. They treat a singular event as an anomaly. A tragedy, sure, but an outlier. A man in Florida dying of anthrax is weird, but without the other data points, the system just treats it as one data point.
So what flips the switch? What cures the blindness?
The pattern. Systems respond to patterns. And the source highlights a few really grim indicators that force this realization. First, you had postal workers falling ill. That was huge.
Why was that the tipping point?
Because it meant the threat wasn't just at the destination. It wasn't just dangerous for the person opening the letter.
It was dangerous to the transit lines. It was leaking.
It was leaking. That's a terrifying way to put it. It turns the entire U.S. Postal Service into a potential hot zone.
And then government buildings tighten access.
Right. But the real smoking gun, according to our notes here, it came from the labs. This is where the science literally forced the bureaucracy to move.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. The labs weren't just testing for the presence of anthrax anymore.
No, presence is a simple binary question, right? Is it there or is it not? That's step one.
So what's step two?
Step two is testing for consistency. The lab started noticing that across these different attacks, different places, different people, there was this frightening consistency. Same material, same preparation, same intent.
And that's when you know you're not dealing with a copycat.
Or a series of coincidences. You're dealing with a single source.
Yeah.
And that realization forces the system to move. It's no longer reacting to a letter, it's reacting to a campaign.
I want to unpack the science here because the source makes a really big deal about the biological reality of what they found. I think I have this misconception that anthrax was some brand new sci-fi mystery germ.
Oh, far from it. Bacillus anthracis has been studied for decades. It's an ancient disease. It wasn't mysterious to scientists at all. We knew what it was, knew how to treat it with antibiotics if you caught it early.
It's a farm disease originally.
Exactly. Yeah. Usually from livestock.
So what made 2001 so different? The source uses two words that seem to be the hinge for everything: refined versus crude.
This is the terrifying nuance that changed everything, the entire profile of the suspect. If you find crude anthrax, you might be dealing with an amateur, someone who scooped up some contaminated soil, maybe did a messy preparation in a garage.
Like homebrew biology.
Exactly. It's dangerous, but it's clumsy. The particles are large, they clump together from moisture or electrostatic charge. Think of it like damp potting soil. You throw it in the air, it just falls to the ground.
But that's not what they found, not in the Daschle and Leahy letters.
No. The spores recovered from those letters were refined. The source explicitly says it behaves differently. It disperses differently.
What does that mean, disperses differently?
It means it acts more like a gas. I mean, you have to imagine the engineering challenge here. Spores naturally want to stick together. To make them a weapon, you have to process them so they flow freely. You have to get rid of the electrostatic charge. You have to mill them down to a specific size, usually between 1 and 5 microns.
1 to 5 microns. I can't even visualize that.
It is incredibly small, invisible to the naked eye. But more importantly, it's aerodynamic. It's small enough to bypass all your body's natural filters in the nose and throat and settle deep in your lungs. That's the difference.
So it doesn't fall.
It doesn't fall to the ground. It expands. It travels through the air. It can fill a room. You open an envelope and doesn't just sit on the desk. It effectively vanishes into the air you're breathing. It floats.
And it stays floating.
And that changes the profile of the attacker entirely, doesn't it?
You don't do that in a bathtub.
You absolutely don't stumble into that level of preparation. You need equipment. You need to know how to use anti-caking agents, like silica, to stop the clumping. The source puts it perfectly. You don't stumble into this, you engineer it.
Which brings us to the who. The source material shifts here from the what to the who, and it makes a pretty bold claim. The list of people who could do this is much shorter than you'd think.
Well, it's just logical deduction. If the material is refined to that weapons-grade standard, you need 3 specific things. First, you need access to the virulent strain, in this case, the AIM strain.
Which you can't just buy at a store. It's controlled. It's in specific labs.
Right. Second, you need training. You need to know the specific scientific processes to dry it, mill it, cook the spores without killing the bacteria, and more importantly, without killing yourself.
And third,
familiarity with containment. You need a lab with negative air pressure, biosafety cabinets, vaccination protocols. So when you combine those 3 filters, access, training, and containment, you're not looking at a random angry person.
Or a foreign terrorist in a cave.
You're looking at a professional. You're looking at someone who likely works within the biodefense establishment itself.
That is just chilling, because it implies the call is coming from inside the house.
It does. And the source notes that this is the moment the FBI steps in fully. But again, it's described as a quiet expansion.
The FBI doesn't enter loudly. It expands quietly. I love that phrasing from the source. It sounds so ominous.
It is. It's not about sirens. It's about jurisdiction. Suddenly, resources are shifting. Agents are pulled from counter-narcotics or organized crime onto this new task force. What started as a male-related death is now officially a national security threat.
And when you label something that, the rules change. We've seen this before.
Everything changes. The budget becomes unlimited, the priority becomes number one, and most importantly, the assumptions change. All those early theories, discarded. The sophistication of the weapon demanded a sophisticated suspect.
Okay, so the system is moving, the profile is narrowing to a scientific expert, but here's where the story gets really tense. The source describes a paradox of pressure.
Yes, this is critical to understanding what happens next.
It says public fear was skyrocketing. I mean, people were microwaving their mail. But inside the investigation, certainty was not increasing.
That's the absolute nightmare scenario for an investigator. The entire world is watching you. The White House is demanding answers yesterday. And science is giving you facts, but it's not giving you names.
The source says, tests confirm what the material is. They don't explain who prepared it.
That's the gap. You know the strain is Ames, but that just tells you the family tree. It doesn't tell you which specific researcher held that vial. And that gap between the weapon and the wielder is where the pressure just builds and builds.
And when a system is under that much pressure, it becomes vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what, though?
To leaning.
Ah, yes, leaning.
This is a concept the source introduces that I found really compelling. Investigations don't just move forward, they lean. Can you explain that?
It's a brilliant way to describe cognitive bias, but on a huge bureaucratic scale. Investigation is this massive beast. It has momentum. So when it starts to lean in a certain direction toward a specific theory or a type of suspect, it's incredibly difficult to pull it back upright.
It's like that old saying, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
It's exactly that. Confirmation bias on a massive scale. The source warns that if you lean too early, before all the evidence is in, you start interpreting ambiguous data as confirmation.
So give me an example. How does that happen in a room full of smart agents?
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say you lean toward the idea that the attacker is a loner scientist with a grudge. Suddenly, finding a scientist who's divorced and eats lunch alone looks like evidence.
When in reality...
In reality, lots of people are divorced and eat lunch alone. It's a neutral fact. But if the investigation is leaning, that neutral fact starts to look like a puzzle piece that fits perfectly.
You start building a narrative instead of just finding the truth.
And the source notes that at this specific moment, the lock-in hadn't happened yet. But all the conditions for it were forming.
Because of the pressure and because of the profile. They knew they were looking for an insider, a scientist. So the investigation naturally leans toward the very community of people who fit that description.
The same labs that are helping them solve the case. It creates a hall of mirrors. The experts helping you understand the weapon are the same demographic as the people who could have created it.
It feels like we're watching a train leave the station. We're not sure if it's on the right track, but we know it is moving fast.
And it's picking up speed. The source ends this section by saying the system stopped reacting and started pursuing.
Pursuing? That sounds active. That sounds good, right? We want the bad guys pursued.
We do, but the source frames it with a very serious warning. Once pursuit begins, it becomes very hard to stop it, even when doubts appear later.
That's the scary part. Even when doubts appear later. Why is it so hard to stop? Is it just stubbornness?
It's a mix of things. It's sunk costs, it's ego, it's pure momentum. Imagine you've authorized 24-hour surveillance on a suspect. You've tapped their phones, briefed the Attorney General that this is the guy.
To suddenly stop and say we were wrong would be...
It would require a level of institutional humility that is incredibly rare.
It suggests that once the machine decides it has a target, the need to catch someone can start to blur the lines of whether you've caught the right someone.
And we saw this happen historically with this case. The early focus on certain persons of interest derailed lives, only for the focus to shift years later. The source mentions the next phase is where the pursuit narrows based on belief rather than proof.
That distinction is just crucial, belief versus proof.
It's the danger zone. Proof is objective. It stands up in court. Proof is spores matching a specific flask in a specific fridge. Belief. Belief is subjective. It's fueled by fear and pressure. It's saying he fits the profile, he acts weird, it must be him.
And if you're pursuing a suspect based on belief because the pressure is too high to wait for proof, you're on a very dangerous line.
You are. You risk solving the problem, which is public fear, without actually solving the crime.
So looking at this deep dive, we've tracked this fascinating arc. We went from this invisible shift in mailrooms all the way to the labs, realizing we're dealing with a sophisticated, refined biological weapon.
Which instantly narrowed the field from foreign terrorist to domestic expert.
And finally, we see the FBI expanding its jurisdiction, turning this into a massive national security hunt, all while the pressure cooker is just screaming.
And the key takeaway, really, is about how these institutions function. We think of investigations like Sherlock Holmes, puzzles cold, rational, step by step.
But they're not.
No, this source reminds us they're human systems. They are prone to pressure, they are prone to leaning. And when the fear is high enough, the system demands an answer.
It demands an answer. Not necessarily the truth right away, but it demands a resolution.
That is a crucial distinction. The what was solved. It was Anthrax. The who was the void. And the system hates a void. It will fill it, sometimes before it should.
It's really a lesson in critical thinking, isn't it? Watching how these narratives form, it makes you wonder about the news you consume today.
Absolutely. It forces you to ask, are we following the evidence, or are we following the momentum? Are we looking at proof, or what we believe must be true because the alternative
That we don't know and we're vulnerable.
is too terrifying to accept?
That is exactly what I want to leave our listeners with. We looked at the mechanics, but the psychology, the pressure to solve the puzzle is just as heavy.
It's the human element in a scientific process.
So here's the final thought for you to chew on. We talked about belief versus proof and the danger of the system leaning. When you watch the news today, where do you see that happening? When a system, a company, a government is under immense pressure to solve a threat, does the need for an answer eventually outweigh the need for the correct answer?
And once that pursuit starts, is it even possible to stop the train?
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you next time.